were operational for Flight 3. So they have got those online now and appear to have taken all of the vertical tanks offline now. And there's actually only 3 of the original 8 left standing at this point, and we don't believe that those are in use. We've seen a lot of vacuum trucks in recent weeks removing the perlite insulation from between the cryo shell and the actual tank as SpaceX goes through the process of scrapping those. And as a result of that, we've seen a little more ground testing and even a second wet dress rehearsal as SpaceX, works out the kinks and all the adjustments that they've made here between flights.
Certainly a lot being shuffled around here. Speaking of shuffling, we're, of course, juggling a number of balls this morning as we're tracking the countdown of this mission. At this point, the SpaceX launch director will be stepping into the pole for the start of prop load, so we'll be keeping an ear open for updates on that. Meanwhile, with the Starliner mission currently heading to the ISS, according to NASA, mission managers have met this morning and they have pulled go for the Boeing Starliner spacecraft to dock to the International Space Station. Again, that is coming up at 12:15 p.m. Eastern, 16:15 UTC for our friends around the world. NASA said they, quote, review the vehicle's status and continue monitoring the manifold leak rates. So, Stephen, want to bring you in on that point, as you and I have both been tracking the leakiness of the propulsion system on Starliner, but it sounds like they've been able to manage things so far. There was the leak that they knew about coming into the launch attempts, and then a couple of additional leaks in another manifold that popped up overnight, but it seems like they've got a good plan moving forward, and they're in a good configuration to dock with station.
Yeah, well, I have a few questions, obviously, for NASA officials in their post-docking press conference about the magnitude of this leak, if it has a similar signature to the leak they found pre-launch, and if this is potentially a sign of a systemic issue with the helium system on the Starliner spacecraft. But obviously, NASA and Boeing officials believe they can manage the leaks as they rendezvous with the ISS and are going to proceed, as you said, with docking around 12:15 Eastern time today. But it'll be interesting to see if they discover more leaks throughout the course of the mission. I know they can handle several more on top of the leaks they already discovered based on some comments that NASA made before the launch. But this certainly, I think, begs the question of whether they need to step back and reassess what is causing these leaks. The hypothesis going into the flight, the leak that they found pre-launch was that it was a defective seal, a small seal about the size of a button on a shirt. So if that's the case, it proves that a very small piece of hardware can cause these, if not significant, at least notable problems for this test flight. So I think they'll need to take a step back and reassess if these seals have a systemic issue, or if there's something else causing these leaks that we need to evaluate and determine what that is.
Yeah, I think we're certainly all here in the space press looking forward to hopefully a good docking sequence in a few hours, and then certainly the post-docking. I believe there's a post-docking news briefing in which we'll hopefully get a lot more information on exactly what you're just talking about, and they can answer some of the questions that you and I'm sure many others have as well. Marcus, bringing things back to the mission at hand, we're now about an hour and 11 minutes away from the planned liftoff at the current T0 time right now. Of course, SpaceX has a 120-minute window, so if they do need to slide more to the right, they do have that option. And we'll talk more about this as the hour goes on, and certainly as we get into the coast phase, assuming the mission goes well. But the flight objectives for this mission, if you look at the launch timeline between Flight 3 and Flight 4, Flight 4 very much slimmed down from the last launch attempt. given what was able to be achieved and some of the things where they came up short last time, were you surprised to see that this go around they're really just focused on sort of the bread and butter of Starship operation, at its core?
Yeah, look, that's a really good point. Really, in Flight 3, the main issues that we saw really when it came down to it was the loss of control authority of the Starship, in the Starship part of the flight I'm referring to there. So that really held up the other tests that they wanted to do to a degree. They did the propellant transfer test, fine, that was great. They couldn't do their Raptor relight, and that was probably due to the same reason. Things weren't settling properly. And of course, you can't re-enter when you don't have the right orientation. So, yeah, look, I'm not really surprised as such. I think that it really needed to happen this way, as Elon Musk had said on X here not that long ago. The real big challenge, the biggest challenge that they face right now is the re-entry, and whether that heat shield is going to hold up and all that sort of thing, which comes back to our FAA points that we were talking about before, right? So we what we want to see is good control of Starship. They've got two new roll thrusters just under the payload bay door area now on this ship that they didn't have on the last one. They've apparently done a lot of internal changes to the vehicle to try to stop the freezing up of those, or the clogging of those reaction control vents that they're using, because really they're just sort of using the ambient sort of tank pressure as far as I understand. So if there was a blockage there's not a huge amount of pressure. These aren't hot gas thrusters or anything like that. There's not a huge amount of pressure to sort of blast anything out. So I think as long as we can see that good control of Starship and good re-entry, at least good control of the orientation during re-entry, that's going to be a really big win. We've all got our fingers crossed, of course. So we want to see that full re-entry. We want to see that plasma right down as far as we can get it. And with any luck, a flip and landing burn, which is one of the key points of difference. In the other previous flights, there was no mention of the Starship trying to do a flip landing, soft landing splashdown in the ocean. And that is supposed to be happening in this flight. So that's a great change. The other big change, of course, is the hot staging ring, which took everybody by surprise, certainly took me by surprise. This huge hot staging ring is going to be essentially pushed away just by itself after the boost back burn, just 2 seconds after, I believe. And they're doing that essentially because, well, I suspect, speculation, but I suspect they're doing that because the thing is very heavy. A few years back, it might have been, not years back, last year at some point, I believe we saw part of the FAA report that said that the hot staging ring alone is 20,000 pounds, which is roughly 9 metric tons or so. So that's a huge amount of dry mass just to add to the top of the vehicle, which was probably not designed for it at the time. You've got to remember, these vehicles, boosters, and ships have sort of been in development for the best part of 12 months before the hot staging ring was even a thing. So I suspect that maybe the header tanks are maybe just not quite designed big enough to support the extra landing mass and things like that. That's pure speculation, but I'm not surprised to see it being pushed away for this flight. A lot of people have asked, whether this is something that is a permanent thing. It's like, well, if they're going to reject this thing, it's not rapidly reusable, right? But actually, I suspect it's probably just temporary, just until they get the next iteration of boosters through. Then it'll probably just be permanently attached, or just part of the landing process.
Yeah, certainly interesting to see what they decide to do with that moving forward. Of course, SpaceX has outlined plans for future versions of Starship with version 2 and version 3. As we're looking out at Starbase here, of course, this pad shot from not too far away from the rocket is fairly clear. The view from a little bit farther away for most other folks probably looks more something like this, much more hazy and foggy. Stephen, you're down there at Starbase, hoping to get eyes on the rocket. I'm guessing you're peering through some fog and hoping that it clears up in the next hour and some change.
That's right, Will. Yeah, familiar story for you and others who've been to Starbase. It's a hazy morning, these 7 a.m. 7 to 9 a.m. launch windows aren't necessarily the best for viewing, at least from my perspective, because it's often hazy here in the morning, and maybe one day we'll get one of these in a clear blue sky in the afternoon one day. But yeah, it's hazy looking across the tidal flats out toward the east toward the launch pad. You can barely make out the launch tower and the vehicle. Visibility is probably a little bit better than the launch back in March, but also some cloud cover overhead.
Well, hopefully in an hour will be at least just enough to clear things out for the folks that have made the pilgrimage down there. Taking a look at our joined live chats, want to thank some folks for your support this morning as we're stepping on through the count. So appreciate Robert Turpin, the $5 super chat to the Lab Padre side. Thanks so much, Robert. Appreciate you being with us this morning, saying thanks, Lab Padre and Spaceflight Now for the coverage. So excited. Next up, Erna on the lab stream with an IDR, and sorry, my currency conversion in my head is not quite fast enough for this one, but really appreciate your support today. And JK Video joining us this morning, and simple message, hello everyone. Hello to you, JK. Glad to have you on board this morning. Also want to welcome some new channel members we have here. Blame Techie joining us with membership this morning, as well as Pete 2.0. Welcome aboard. William H joining us with channel membership as well. And Sue Delp, channel membership as well. Really appreciate that from all of you. Of course, channel membership comes with a number of perks on both channels, so be sure to check out the description of that. You can read more about the perks, but of course they include things like additional launch views and a higher quality stream. And we do have word from SpaceX now that they are go for prop load, so they took that poll and they are preparing to step through the process of loading propellant on the ship upper stage is where things will begin. Of course, that starts at T-minus 49 minutes again with liquid methane being loaded on the ship upper stage, followed at T-minus 47 minutes with ship LOX load.
Certainly has been exciting seeing how much faster they can do the load these days with the extra pumps and that sort of thing. Sort of somewhere between 30 and 40 minutes as soon as we sort of see it rising in the tanks.
Yeah, I was just as we were getting ready for the stream, you know, looking back at previous timelines for the mission, and you know, it's really starting to feel it's not quite a one-for-one with Falcon 9 fueling to this, obviously a much larger vehicle, but at this point, not too far off from the timeline of a Falcon Heavy rocket. So SpaceX really starting to refine its fueling process. As we step on through the count, of course, we've been looking at the test campaign for this mission. Seen a number of different static fires. You're taking a look at the full engine static fire here for the ship upper stage, that same one that you see there on the live view on the right hand side of your screen. Just going to go ahead, step through these fairly quickly, and we'll talk over them as we were watching them. Joel, as we've been seeing the campaign heading towards Flight 4, what has stood out to you about the mission milestones getting ready for Flight 4 as compared to Flight 3?
You know, one of the big things is just how quickly SpaceX has made a lot of their testing seem routine. You know, these static fires and wet dress rehearsals just seem to go off remarkably well when you consider that this is still very much an experimental rocket and has only launched a couple times in ways that most other rocket companies don't even, launch, would still just be in the ground testing phase. And, we did see a second wet dress rehearsal this time, but I think that was less to do with the rocket and more to do with, like I said before, that changeover in the ground infrastructure from the vertical tanks to the horizontal tanks, and working out any kinks and clearing out those lines. That's going to change. Switching to horizontal tanks is going to change a lot of the head pressures and stuff, because you don't have the same kind of gravity assist that you do with those vertical tanks. But it's amazing how routine this testing has already become. Because it's especially when you really get into it with the booster systems and everything, and how complicated that launch mount is, and all the ground support infrastructure is on this rocket, with the 20 outer engines on the booster getting started by the launch mount itself. So there are 21 quick disconnects on the launch mount for the booster, and then one on the farther up the tower for the ship. It's a very complicated system, and SpaceX, like they do with Falcon 9, they make things look easy.
Yeah, it certainly seems like a increasingly streamlined process from the outside looking in. Love to be a fly on the wall for some of those discussions as they're looking at the changes they're going to make. And of course, one of the changes, as we've been watching this looping video on the test campaign heading into Flight 4, they've now done their final static fire tests at the suborbital site as they've moved that process over to Massey's, right, Joel?
Yeah, and just a couple of days ago, we actually saw Ship 26, which is, not suspected to be a flight article anymore, just a ground test article, but it was static fired over at the Massey's outpost, the first static fire over there, which is pretty quick considering that, they really built that entire test stand over there and flame trench with the water-cooled flame bucket pretty quick, in just a couple of months. And I personally, I was actually very surprised, because pretty much as soon as they static fired the Flight 5 vehicle down here at the launch site, as soon as that testing was done, they started tearing apart that test stand. And I hadn't expected them to go that far until they had done this first static fire at Massey's, because it put them in an interesting situation where if something had gone wrong with that first test fire at Massey's and they had to do any kind of engine swap here on this Flight 4 Starship, they would have been in a pickle of not being ready to test the Starship to verify it. But the static fire of Ship 26 over at Massey's looks to have gone well. We haven't seen or heard of any issues with that test, so it looks like Massey's is now online, and we should see ship static fires there. And one of the big things for SpaceX, one of the big bonuses, is that Massey's is set a lot farther back from the highway, so they can do those tests without having to shut down the road, without having to close access to the beach, and without interrupting work at the launch site, which is going to be, a very big deal as they work to build out a second launch tower here. They're going to want that work to be able to continue as uninterrupted as possible for an active launch site.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And in fact, speaking of the second launch tower, We're currently watching the progress of additional pieces of the tower segment for that second tower be essentially bundled up and prepared to head out to southern Texas. Here at the press site, where we've got this view right here. Thank you, Stephen, as we're looking at a barge at the turn basin, just to give you a sense of scale and perspective. And actually, it looks like the exhaust is coming off the barge, so it looks like the barge is actually in motion. So as we're speaking with you now, we've got some tower segments headed down to southern Texas. A little bit of perspective on what we're looking at here. There are 2 tower segments on board in the front of the barge. In between the 2 tower segments, you've got essentially the elevator system that slides the chopsticks, the carriage that moves the chopsticks up and down the Mechazilla. And then closest to the dock right now are the chopsticks themselves. And then, of course, in the background, as we're going to tie this to Artemis in just a moment, you can see the mobile launcher out at Launch Complex 39B. They've been doing a series of checkouts and tests at the pad over the last several months. Most visually prominent of those, of course, is the new emergency egress system, which was not needed for the Artemis 1 mission, is going to be very relevant for Artemis 2, given that 3 NASA astronauts, 1 Canadian Space Agency astronaut will be on board the Orion spacecraft. And so with a crew on the mobile launcher, you need a good way for them to quickly get away. If the launch abort escape system has not been activated on Orion, they can use the basket system to safely get away from the tower and into a good position. So good to see the progress on this. It's been a busy couple of days seeing those tower segments and Mechazilla 2 infrastructure being bundled up and tied down to that barge as it is now making its way out.
Yeah, and one very interesting thing about this new chopsticks here is they are significantly shorter than what we're seeing in Starbase currently. So if you look at on the right here at the Flight 4 vehicle, basically all of those chopsticks that extend out past the vehicle when they're lifting is not going to be there. The chopsticks are essentially going to be just long enough to get the vehicles into position over the mount without that extra length at the end. And I think one of the biggest, the leading theories on that is just that it will give them a lot better control authority having those a lot shorter. I think about a month ago, we started seeing them do much quicker testing with the chopsticks at Starbase, kind of preparing for a catch in the near future. And one thing that was very noticeable during those tests is when they moved those chopsticks at speed and stopped, there was a significant wobble as the ends of those want to keep moving, and that inertia because they're so long. So I think it will give them better control authority, but the shorter chopsticks is also an indication that SpaceX believes that they are going to be able to land these boosters very precisely.
Yeah, certainly looking forward to seeing if that theory bears out on the shorter chopsticks, but it sounds like a reasonable conclusion to come to. So we'll track the progress of the second tower coming through. We're now T-minus 51 minutes, 35 seconds and counting. Just a couple minutes away from the start of fueling actually beginning. Again, that process begins at T-minus 49 minutes with the loading of liquid methane on the ship upper stage. 2 minutes later, LOX load begins on the ship. That's followed by booster fuel load at T minus 40 minutes, booster LOX load T minus 37 minutes. Still a bit hazy looking at a farther off camera of ours from a southern view of Starbase. But the outline of Starship is starting to be a little clearer from that vantage point. So hopefully the haze is burning off. Of course, some of the venting from the ground system there creating its own sort of localized fog. But once this rocket launches, naturally it'll literally and figuratively rise above all of that. So won't be too much of an issue. Want to turn to part of our conversation we had last week with Lisa Watson Morgan. We talked about the Starship rocket, which will be used as the human landing system for the Artemis program, starting with the Artemis 3 mission, is what it's currently aiming for. So in this part of the conversation, we spoke with her about her thoughts on Flight 3 and looking ahead. So again, this is Lisa Watson Morgan, who heads the Human Landing System program, which is based at Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama.
Flight 3 was a great accomplishment, and I mean, clearly it didn't meet every single objective that SpaceX had. But as far as NASA was concerned, it was great to see the learning, the lessons that came out of 1 and 2, and to see how that was employed with either through manufacturing, production, through operations of how Flight 3 was conducted. So that part was really good. We were able to to see the additional CO2 into the system, and you saw that there weren't any issues around Raptor, and no fires, no anything like that, and a lot of good consistency, frankly, around the engines. And when you get all those engines to light up, for us, it was a significant win, because really that's one of the first steps, obviously, that you need when you're launching.
And we'll have more with our conversation with Lisa Watson Morgan as the count continues on and as we're in the coast phase as well. Point in time to mark, we're at T minus 48 minutes, 15 seconds and counting. At this point, SpaceX confirms that prop load on the ship upper stage is underway. So Marcus, to you, bringing you into back in the conversation, your thoughts on that part of our conversation with Lisa and her reflections on Flight 3 as we're now less than 15 minutes away from Flight 4.
To be honest, I haven't listened to that snippet, so I'm not actually sure what she was saying there. But yeah, what was the rundown?
Essentially, talking about the progress that the Starship vehicle has made in the last few flights and some of the improvements in especially protecting the Raptor engines on the Super Heavy booster and the ship upper stage, adding additional hardware to tamp down and prevent fires from breaking out, and some of those corrective actions.
Yeah. Look, it's interesting to see where they're going with it. And we know with version 2, they're going to be quite drastically, I believe, redesigning a lot of the aft section so they don't quite get this same buildup of dangerous gases that can become explosive and things like that. So I think they're putting in a lot of work around the design of that going forward. And obviously they've had to put in a lot of, over the last few iterations of this design, they've had to put in these expulsion systems to sort of blow out the dangerous gases that build up in there, right? So yeah, there's all sorts of great things that they've done to evolve this. One of the more interesting parts of the second iteration design, version 2, is just that it's being expanded just a little bit, and obviously looking at newer version Raptors and all this sort of thing to simplify this even further. This is going to just make it less problematic in terms of how fragile that whole area under the aft is, because there's a lot of little plumbing parts that come out of all these engines. There's 33 of them packed down in the bottom of this gigantic booster, and it can be damaged quite quickly. So over the past, since Flight 1, they've had to build up all these thermal protection systems and shielding and all sorts of stuff so that the vehicle can continue on its merry way without causing itself all sorts of harm. So we've seen great success with that, obviously, because we've had the last 2 flights that have had 33 engines going all the way up to engine cutoff and stage set. And that's a huge victory alone, I think, because, we've seen other vehicles in the past with a lot of engines have many troubles. I'm not going to talk about the N1, but, that was one of the big issues, resonance building up and all this sort of thing. So I just think that being able to see 33 of them working reliably together right up to stage set like that has been a huge improvement from Flight 1. And, each gets better. So we really want to see that today.
Certainly so. And also want to note, as we're now T-minus 45 minutes and counting, a couple minutes ago, second stage LOX load should have also gotten underway. So we'll keep our eyes on the fuel levels. Look for the frost line to begin to form on the ship upper stage as fueling is set to begin on the Super Heavy booster in now less than 5 minutes. Well, you can see a little bit of venting in between those 2 hypersonic grid fins.
Yeah, the venting process is quite interesting. A lot of people may not understand what's going on because we saw a lot of venting here just a little bit earlier. Lots of gas outgassing from the top of the tower and also from the launch mount and things like that. And you see this because as they send the propellant through all these huge lines, you've got to imagine how big these lines are to run this propellant all the way from the tank farm underground right up through the orbital launch mount and up through the tower. There's a lot of plumbing in there, and it's quite warm down in Texas right now. So they've got all of that piping has to be chilled right down, and as they're pumping the propellant through it, it's essentially cooling that, and that's what all the venting is. It's boiling, it's boiled off oxygen, methane, boiled off oxygen, and things like that. So what we're seeing now is it looks quite still, right? There's not that much venting going on, and this is sort of the time when they're essentially starting to top the vehicle, well, fill the vehicle up. So we should see frost lines coming pretty soon here, if we don't already.
Yeah, I'm not seeing that quite yet, but it's only been a couple minutes, so should start seeing some evidence from the outside of that fueling process in the next few minutes here.
Yeah, and one thing to keep in mind is that the methane, they start that a couple minutes earlier, but it does take a little longer to show up because the first part of the methane tank that gets filled is actually the downcomer or transfer tube from that upper tank down to the engines. And so that tube's in the middle of the liquid oxygen tank. So as that gets cold, there's nothing visibly that we can see on the outside of the rocket. Until it starts, it's got to fill that downcomer and then it's got to fill the bottom dome of the methane tank. And then as it starts, the propellant starts to go up the sides of the main tank is when we'll actually start to really see.
Yeah, that's a really good point because you can't see that. Obviously, it's all internal. And we're actually just seeing that propellant load of the Super Heavy is underway. SpaceX posted out there. So we should see frost lines creeping up there shortly. Yeah, it's a very good point because that all that propellant's coming into the quick disconnect systems. It's going straight up through the downcomer, right up as you say, and it's only then that we're going to see frost starting to appear on the upper methane tanks. We should see liquid oxygen pretty quickly, though. Looking like we've got visible frost maybe there on the ship.
Yeah, you can just start to see it's starting to frost up there on the bottom of the methane tank or oxygen tank. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah,
just a
definitely
little
starting
slice
to
of
see.
it.
Just starting to form now. I think we're little bit eager out here in Florida and used to seeing evidence just slightly more quickly on a Falcon 9, but obviously much smaller tanks and a different launch vehicle. So kind of apples to oranges.
Yeah, which really pulling back to what you said earlier in the broadcast about the fact that they've got this super heavy and Starship loading timeline pretty close to that of a Falcon 9. It's really crazy when you think about just how much more propellants are being added into these vehicles than a Falcon 9. That they can do
Yeah,
it so
it's a
fast.
crazy amount. It's a crazy amount. It's like that's like 4,600 tons total or something. 3,400 in the ship, in the booster, sorry, and 1,200 in the ship. So you're pushing up towards 5,000 tons of propellant that comes in here in about between 30 40 minutes. It's crazy when you think about how powerful those pumps need to be. The big pumps that sort of sit there beside the hippos. It's really crazy to think how fast it can pump it up there, and you need a lot of pressure to pump it up that high. Obviously, it's not quite the same as when the booster is draining itself out when it's in flight, because at least gravity's pushing it the right way. But yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah, and I
As far
think
as we know,
that
the sorry, you go.
well, I was just going to say that's people might think it's counterintuitive that the ship that has roughly a third the amount of propellant as the booster starts loading before, but it's because of that pressure, because that propellant has to go halfway up the tower before it gets into the ship, whereas the booster loads in from the bottom of the stack.
Yeah.
Just noting where we are on the countdown now. We're T-minus 39 minutes, 5 seconds and counting. As you mentioned, Marcus, SpaceX did note the start of prop load on the Super Heavy booster a couple minutes ahead of where they had it in the timeline, although they do note all those times are approximations. The next fueling milestone that has yet to begin is booster LOX load, coming up in just about a minute and a half from now. Want to bring back in another part of our conversation, harkening back to something that we had talked about a little bit earlier in the broadcast. But this is Lisa Watson-Morgan talking about the objective of the on-orbit relight of the Raptor engine while the booster is coasting, something that they were hoping to accomplish last go around, but because they didn't have good attitude control, they decided to pass over that milestone. So this is a part of our conversation with the head of the HLS program, the Human Landing System, Lisa Watson-Morgan. Let's listen in.
SpaceX actually, I think, took on a lot of tasks, activities. I would say in Flight 3, a lot. And you're right, relight of Raptors are really important for NASA. Now, this early in the test campaign, do they have to show it now? No. In the future, yes. And so, as they typically do with their iterative approach, this time they're definitely focusing on the whole hypersonic and water landing, soft water landing. That's one of the key things that they're looking for in Flight 4. And so they have reduced the number of events that they're trying to check off, because you can see each flight test they're able to do a little more and a little more. And once they're able to get the soft water landing, then it's only a matter of time, really, before they do a return to launch sign and land on back on the pad where they launched, which that will be incredibly exciting. And quite an accomplishment. But again, that's just building on what they've been doing in the past on other programs that SpaceX has. And then I think thereafter we will see the relight of the Raptor. And so yes, it is a future goal, and it will be something that's required, and we will need to see that.
And so our thanks again to Lisa Watson-Morgan for insight into that. followed up asking, by when do they want to see that relight test? And she clarified sometime in the back half of 2024 or early 2025 would be acceptable to NASA. But of course, the sooner they can perform that, the sooner they get the data. Bringing you back into the conversation, Stephen, as you mentioned at the top, for those who were not with us at the very beginning of our live simulcast between Spaceflight Now and Lab Padre, you also had the chance to talk with Lisa in the run-up to this mission. From your reporting from that conversation and otherwise, want to just get your thoughts on that piece of the pie of being able to do the relight of the Raptor, as it's going through its coast phase, and the importance of that for the Starship program.
Yeah, well, I was also surprised a little bit to hear from Lisa Watson-Morgan when I talked to her a few weeks ago that they're not planning the Raptor relight in space on this mission. The sense I got from her is this is kind of a back to basics mission for SpaceX. They did a lot in Flight 3. They did the tank-to-tank propellant transfer within Starship, which she said achieved its objectives, transferring some liquid oxygen from one tank to another inside the vehicle in microgravity, no smart heat. That was successful. They also tested the payload bay door, the PEZ door. There were some issues with that. But this mission, no PEZ door opening, no propellant transfer in the ship, no engine relight. They had the roll control issue of the clogged thrusters on Flight 3. And the sense I get is the full fix or full solution to that clogged thruster issue is still not expected to be fully developed and fully certified for the Starship until sometime later this year. And I think we won't see the engine relight until that point. So to me, this indicates that we probably won't see a full orbital Starship for at least one, maybe more flights, depending on how this one goes. And that pushes back the time that we may see actual Starlink satellites on Starship. I expect that's the first payload we'll see on a Starship flight is the larger Starlink satellites flying in that PEZ payload compartment. But I still think there's probably a few flights down the road based on where they are now. They kind of did a grab bag of experiments and demonstrations on Flight 3, kind of figured out where they are at various points on the vehicle, and decided that what they really need to focus on now is getting the ship and the booster back to Earth rather than doing relight or any sort of other orbital operations.
Yeah, I'll be curious to see when exactly SpaceX decides to load up Starship with Starlink satellites and start flying those. I mean, they mentioned possibly doing a booster return to landing site operation by Flight 6. That would be, of course, as Lisa said, an incredible milestone. Marcus, just given the development progress of Starship, does that, for the booster landing back on land, given where things are now, does that seem like a realistic timeline, or is that still a little far out in your mind?
Yeah, look, it's really going to depend on how this flight goes, I think. And actually, the SpaceX streams just started, I believe. But yeah, it really comes down to this one. If they can nail everything that they need to here, the next one, they would probably do some more controlled tests to ensure that they can get to orbit and obviously deorbit correctly.
Well, this is Stephen here at Starbase. One other thing to note as they go into orbital flights eventually with Starship, when they transition from the suborbital trajectory to a full, stable, low Earth orbit flight, SpaceX is actually going to need an FAA re-entry license. on top of the launch license. So that could be something else to watch for.
Yeah, that's a good point, Stephen. As they do need that reentry license, and be curious to see what the timeline for achieving that will be. If it will, have the benefit of obviously going through all these flight campaigns, and if that will buy them down any time on that approval. And actually, it's ironic you bring that up right now, as we just got an email from the FAA noting that they're welcoming public comment on a draft environmental assessment for inversion space reentry capsule called Ray. So, between inversion space, you've got Varda obviously bringing back capsules, and it's an interesting time for the FAA as they're looking to assess a number of space businesses that are on ramping and looking for that type of operation.
That's right. I think in the long run, SpaceX and the FAA both have an interest. Both the regulator and and SpaceX have an interest in getting to a point where they can have a license for multiple missions, both on the launch and reentry side, instead of going through this process for every flight. I'm curious when that might happen. Obviously, for Falcon 9, they kind of have a standing license for launch to launch, as long as there's no mishap. So at some point, Starship will get to that point.
Yeah, it's interesting to note that, I know a lot of people, as every time we get close to one of these Starship launches and we're waiting on a license, a lot of people like to try and hate on the FAA, but, the FAA is doing the best they can. This isn't a governmental organization that's, not used to doing business the way SpaceX wants to do business, and they're trying to pivot and they're trying to adapt. But you think about the other launch providers, the more traditional launch providers, and they didn't launch anywhere near the way that SpaceX does, both with the cadence of Falcon 9 that the FAA has adapted to, but also the kind of experimental and fast-paced program that is Starship.
Yeah, it's certainly a different paradigm shift for the FAA, just ramping up the pace of progress that they're trying to match with industry, and certainly they've gone up to Capitol Hill asking for additional resources to help make that happen, since the progress of the space ecosystem here in the United States is something that is of great national interest to lawmakers. And so the hope, certainly from the FAA's perspective, is that will garner some greater support from lawmakers in upcoming budgets. And as I mentioned, we are now seeing the start of the SpaceX stream. So they're just going over a recap of Flight 3, as we've already been doing throughout the course of our broadcast this morning.
It's worth noting, I think, that at 30 minutes, at T-minus 30 minutes, 20 seconds with that stream, there was a shot looking upwards of the booster that we hadn't seen before. It's amazing. It's amazing. It was from Flight 3, presumably, just looking straight up as it was coming down through the atmosphere. Very cool.
And yeah, let's go ahead and take a look. Actually, good timing. We're seeing the flight profile of this mission. Appreciate the timing of this animation. It's works well for our conversation here.
Really hoping we get a camera on that hot stage ring ejection.
Yeah, I'll be curious to see if they've got a camera pointed. Well, I suppose it'll be down of the orientation of the booster, but up towards the hot staging ring as it's sitting right now at the pad. But I think that's something that certainly a lot of us are interested to see exactly what that looks like. And it looks like a ship's going to end up not too far off from where you are down there, Marcus.
Yeah, western side of the country, Western Australia there on that side. We're actually over the opposite side, so in Tasmania, a little tiny island. You can barely see it, just as the curvature there. No, that's a cool animation. Nice load going on there now.
Yeah, it's great to get these aerial shots from some of the drones around the orbital launch mount there. Currently T-minus 25 minutes, 30 seconds and counting. The next fueling milestone that we're anticipating is coming up at T-minus 19 minutes and 40 seconds. It's when the Raptor engine chill down on both the booster and the ship gets underway. Just as a quick point of note for our viewers here on the Lab Padre and the Spaceflight Now side, you'll notice that our countdown clock's slightly different from what you're seeing here on the SpaceX feed. Our clock is coming in real time. What you're seeing from SpaceX coming in on a slight delay. So again, we'll call things out in real time. And actually, let's go ahead and listen to SpaceX's Dan Hughes
for yet another Starship launch. I'm coming to you live from the Raptor's nest behind the Mega Bay. I'm here with our Pad Red team and some of our flight controllers this morning. Everything has been going really smooth. We did have the Red team going a little bit earlier to fix a ground side issue, but that was taken care of. That's why we slid a little bit later into our window. But as of right now, we are on track for liftoff at 7:50 a.m. Central Time. That's 12:50 UTC. As you can see, we are actively loading propellant onto Starship and Super Heavy. Those frost lines are ticking up as we load liquid methane, that's our fuel, liquid oxygen, that's our oxidizer, onto both vehicles. They're cryogenic, so they're subcooled to several hundred degrees below zero. Since Flight 3, we've made a few more upgrades, helping to bring Prop Farm 2.0 online. That's just going to help us to continue to shorten the amount of prop load time that we're going to need. We're also going to be using it for Launch Tower number 2, which is going to be coming to Starbase real soon. The faster we go, the less prop we're going to lose to boil off, and the better we can ensure things like temperatures are in the right range for Raptor startup. Now, those first two flights took about 90 minutes to load prop on board. That third, we knocked it all the way down to just 51 minutes. We're aiming for about 46 minutes of prop load time for today's op, eventually hoping to get that down all the way to 40, which for some context, that's just 5 minutes more than we take to load Falcon 9, but we're doing it with 10 times the amount. So this morning, ship prop load started at T-minus 50 minutes, booster at T-minus 43 minutes. We're going to pause the ship main tank prop load in just a couple of minutes to do the header tanks, which are going to do that attempted ship landing burn. We expect the ship to close out all of its prop at about 3 minutes and 20 seconds before liftoff, and then booster at about 2:50. Now, our final countdown sequence is going to look very familiar. It's going to be the exact same as it was on flights 2 and 3. So we'll light those engines, and then about 4 seconds later, we will actually see it lift off. But I mean, right now, we are just under 23 minutes away from launch. We're not working any issues either with the vehicle, the range. Weather is 95% go, so not dealing with any winds or weather issues today. If we do have to scrub, our next attempt would probably be about 48 hours from now. It's all going to be driven by commodities and just how far we get into the count. But everything looking good for liftoff just about 22 and a half minutes from now. I'll check back in with you guys in a few minutes, and I'll send it back over to Kate and Jesse.
And some good updates from SpaceX's Dan Hote. Stephen, bringing you back in here, you heard Dan echoing one of the points that we were making earlier in the broadcast, that they're getting the fueling of Starship pretty close to approximating what we're seeing on a Falcon 9 rocket. Just your thoughts on that, fairly dramatic shift on, a vehicle that has significantly more fuel on it.
Yeah, it's an impressive feat. Starship has roughly 10 times, and by mass, 10 times the propellant of the Falcon 9 rocket, and it's taking not much longer than a Falcon 9 to fully load the Starship. Falcon 9 begins loading at 35 minutes, just for comparison's sake. So it is something that SpaceX wants to tighten the timeline for tanking Starship in order to eventually achieve the types of turnarounds that Elon Musk envisions for Starship. That's going to be necessary, and also it just kind of reduces the workload on the launch team. They don't have to come in with their ship for a 10 or 12 hour countdown as we sometimes see with other rockets. They can come in and start overseeing this countdown, which is actually automated, but there is a team kind of looking over the shoulders of the computer controlling the countdown here at the control center at Starbase. It lessens the time they need actually to run console.
Great shot of the engine bay there.
Yeah, I think Dan actually broke some information, some news there that almost slipped by me because he said it very nonchalantly, but unless I misheard, he said, when he was talking about how they have Prop Farm 2.0, it sounded to me like he said it was going to be used for Tower 2 as well, which means we're not going to see a second tank farm built here in the coming months like a lot of people were expecting, but that they're going to use one farm to feed out to both towers, which is news to me.
Yeah, I've always been interested in whether they really would immediately. That doesn't mean that they may not put another second one in later once they've got it really, dialed in, this whole return landing system. But if they're launching infrequently, they don't really need to have two tank farms right now. They could just route it. Great views there. That drone shot's
the interesting
great.
thing though is that by the time they get to launching for the Artemis program, they are going to need a pretty rapid cadence and for a short period of time. But I think that they, like he said, their turnaround if they don't launch today is 2 days. So that would be my expectation going forward. It takes hundreds of tanker truck deliveries to load up this fuel farm for a launch. So if they're trying to, fill a depot in space, they're not going to be launching from at a very rapid cadence from here at a one tank farm.
Yeah, that's right.
And
Another little interesting tidbit of information was that they confirmed there earlier that the hot staging ring jettison was a temporary thing. So that just confirmed it for those people that were asking. I've heard that many, many times in the last couple of weeks.
Going back to the launch cadence for the Artemis campaign, the way I look at it is basically SpaceX needs to get the Starship flying about as often as the Falcon 9 is currently flying, at least for that short period of time, to fully do the tankers refills of the depot in the north.
Yeah, I think that
fellas.
makes a lot of sense.
Just want to make a quick point in time note. We're currently T-minus 17 minutes, 27 seconds and counting. They have begun, as you saw, some views of the 33 Raptor engines at the base of the Super Heavy booster. The Raptor engine chill is in work. And at this point, they're going to continue filling both the ship upper stage and the Super Heavy booster until just about the 3-minute mark on either side of that. Ship prop load wraps up at T-minus 320. Booster prop load wraps up at T-minus 250.
Little interesting part of the animation that we just saw there a moment ago. It looks like the engine ignition fires up before it starts flipping, which is a bit different to what we saw in the early landing attempts. I believe that we saw it flip and then fire the engines. So that's interesting. That's interesting.
I thought it did light right as they were flipping.
Yeah, maybe.
Because
it looks like...
I believe that they need it because I believe that the engines help control that tail end of the flip. So they need to be up and running.
Yeah, maybe it looked like it sort of fired up a little bit earlier in that animation, but might be wrong.
It is sometimes crazy to think about just how long ago how long it's been since we've seen the flip maneuver from a ship.
Oh, sure.
We are, what, 3 years now since SN15?
Yeah, I forget how long it was, but yeah,
Yeah,
it's
I think it
been
was
it's
I
been
think it was
ages.
May of 2021, so we're just over 3 years now.
A little over 3 years and perhaps under 2 hours from seeing it again. As we're looking at the ship upper stage, and actually this is a good time to bring this question for you, Joel. You see there what appear to the layperson as a couple of missing tiles on the heat shield. We know that there's another one that's slightly less in depth, but can you explain why it looks like there's some missing heat shield tiles and what SpaceX is actually doing with this?
Yeah, and we got confirmation a little bit last night from Elon's alternate Twitter account that because people were asking why are there missing heat shield tiles, and he said experiments. One of the big thing really for this flight test, it's all about that reentry data. They need to see where they're at with this heat shield. This is one of the biggest unknowns still of this vehicle. One of the things they really have very little data about through all their testing.
It's
And
interesting
they
actually
need it.
because SpaceX just posted about this exact thing, like literally a minute ago. So their exact text is, we intentionally placed one thin heat shield tile and removed 2 tiles completely from the ship to measure how hot things get without tiles in those locations, while also testing some thermal protection options. So that's a more official, straight from SpaceX just a minute ago.
Yeah. And we saw a tweet from Elon, I think earlier in the week, about the basically the fragility of this system, and that there's definitely spots where a loss of a single tile they think could probably compromise the entire vehicle during reentry. And we have definitely seen heat shield tiles falling off on every launch so far. And it's very important to note that where these 2 missing tiles and 1 thinner tile is it's on the skirt. And there's some holes where those 2 missing tiles are that are presumably sensors, where they can get good heating data on what's going on. Presumably there's some behind good tiles. There's some behind each of these experimental locations. They can get good data on the changes,
Yeah.
the differences in the heating. And the reason that you would put them on the skirt is that if the plasma does burn through in that location, it's not puncturing one of the propellant tanks. So it's much likely to cause an immediate failure in the vehicle if you lose a tile in the skirt, which is an
Yeah,
unpressurized
exactly.
section to begin with.
It's also, I think, just behind a vacuum Raptor. But then it was like, well, the vacuum Raptors aren't actually needed for landing anyway, after they cut off to get into their trajectory initially. So even if it sort of melts through that one of those vacuum Raptors, doesn't really matter for the landing burn. So yeah, it's a safe place to have them. And yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how they go with this thinner heat shield tile. It was also worth mentioning that they showed an interior shot of a HLS design there at about 14 minutes, T minus 14 minutes 43. That was a cool shot.
And as we're getting down to the final 12 minutes, Stephen, one last quick one from me to you before we really get into the final 10 minutes. We're looking at some video from an integrated test between Axiom Space, NASA, and SpaceX down at Hawthorne as they were running through some of the tests with a mock-up of the elevator and actually, let's pause and listen into Dan Hout real quick.
Far, the board looks really clean, not tracking any impediments to a launch just under 12 minutes from now. Prop loads continuing. Looking at the numbers real quick, we're about 85% full on the ship. We did pause to start filling those header tanks on ship. Again, those are the two smaller tanks in the very top of the nose cone that we're going to use for that attempted landing burn with ship. And with the booster, we're just at about 75, 76% or so on our methane and LOX, so getting pretty full there. Those are going to continue down to about 3 minutes and 20 seconds before liftoff. That's when we'll close out all the prop on the ship, and then T-minus 2 minutes and 50 seconds on the booster. A lot of work also going on in the background. Our range safety teams working to make sure the area, not just around the pad, but in the sea space out in the Gulf, and also in the anticipated entry point in the Indian Ocean are clear. We're not tracking any blockers, any boats, anything like that in the zone right now, but their work literally continues right up until those last couple of minutes. So they're working pretty hard to make sure everything stays clear. But right now the range is green. I already talked about it in the beginning. It looks a little bit cloudy, but weather not a concern today. Really light winds. We only had about a 5% chance of violation when we started this morning, and that's held. So everything continuing to look really good for launch so far. The pad itself is getting ready. Reminder that we're going to light those engines about 4 minutes before it actually takes off. So you'll see them start, the 33 engines on Super Heavy start to light prior to that T0, and then about 2 seconds after we'll start to see first motion. But everything looking great. Just coming up on 10 minutes until launch. Getting excited down here, ready to feel the rumble. I'll send it back to you guys over in Hawthorne.
So good updates from Dan, and it's good to hear that the clouds that are obscuring some visibility are not going to be an impediment to launch. But Stephen, quickly to you before we get into the final 10 minutes, or now the final 9.5 minutes. Just your thoughts briefly on that integrated test between Axiom and SpaceX, the progress for HLS. We may have lost touch with Stephen at this point. We'll talk with him on the other side of launch.
It sure is getting exciting at this point. Like, I mean, everybody in the like, it always amazes me. There's so many people in the chat, right? So almost 30,000 people here on the Space Flight Now side, and what, another 4,500 here on the lab side. Like, everybody liking these really helps to push them out there. So yeah, thanks for liking them to get that up there. So many people everywhere. Like, just sound out to where you're watching from. I'm always interested in how many people are watching from all these locations around the world.
Yeah, definitely love to see where folks are joining in from. And as you're watching with us live, as we're coming into the final 8 minutes and some change, whether you're watching on the Spaceflight Now side or the Lab Padre side, be sure to hit that like button and share the stream. It allows the YouTube algorithm to do its thing and bring this coverage to more people. Taking a quick look as we're in the final few minutes here, want to acknowledge some folks for your support today. Our thanks to Tom Hadelbreck for 100 Norwegian krona super chat. Really appreciate that. Yasta with a $10 super chat. Thank you so much, Yasta, saying thanks to Lab and Spaceflight Now for bringing us the world's most inspiring events. We're more than happy to do so. Appreciate your support of the work. Piper Saul with a $20 super chat, saying simply go SpaceX. Thank you, Piper Saul. Jonathan McD joining us as well with a $2 or £2 sterling super chat, saying remember to hit that like. It means more boost. Absolutely. Cosmic with a $5 super chat, saying give me fuel, give me fire. And cheers, everybody. Landon Gahau with a $10 super chat, saying showing love for all of you. And a special shout out to Marcus House. Thank you all for your dedication to space exploration news.
Hey, no problem. Thanks for watching.
Dan Kerman with a $10 super chat. And hashtag free Stumpium. Sure that the hopper there's got great views and enjoys watching these Starship launches for as much as he can. Motor Gas with a $5 super chat. Also with a little bit of support for Stumpy there. Crow Guy with a €5 super chat, offering some root beer money for the lab folks. Let's listen into Dan real quick for a quick update.
6.5 minutes away. You can see when we throw up the graphics for prop load that we're almost closed out, ship more than 90% full. Those header tanks are done. And then the boosters right coming up on 90% real soon. So we're going to see those close out in the next couple of minutes. Ship's going to end at about 3 minutes and 20 seconds. It'll be fully loaded. And then booster at about 2 minutes and 50 seconds. After all the props loaded on, we go through a lot of steps to safe ground systems. You're doing things called pushbacks where you're just clearing all of those lines on the ground of propellant before we lift off. But once we're done, we're going to have 10 million pounds of liquid propellant on board Starship to help power the most powerful vehicle ever designed. If we do hold, we have a built-in hold gate at T-minus 40 seconds. We can hold there for about 30 minutes or so today. If we need to wait for final pressure checks or for if we have anything on the range, anything like that. Did just get that the range is green. So we are coming up 5 minutes and 20 seconds away. We are not planning to hold at T-minus 40 unless we trip some kind of hold alarm, something like that. So we could blow right through that gate and go right to launch. Don't be shocked if we hold at T40 though. And if we do, we can hold for a couple of minutes and then keep going. Our window is open all the way until 9 a.m. today.
Now, once we pass through T-minus 40 seconds, a number of events will occur in rapid succession. The ground spin and ignition.
And some good updates. Of course, we'll keep a close eye out to see if, in fact, they do need to enter into that hold at T-minus 40 seconds. And again, just as a reminder, if for whatever reason they are not able to launch today, if they hit a last-minute issue, they do have a 48-hour turnaround time for this mission. So I'll be back looking for a liftoff if they need it on Saturday, June 8th. But so far, all seems to be progressing well towards a liftoff in now less than 4 minutes, Joel.
Yeah, it's getting real exciting. And you know, like kind of harkening back to what we said earlier, is they make this look easy. This is still an experimental rocket, and here we are.
Made some improvements from our Flight 3 learnings, so hopefully that will work and we'll see a successful soft splashdown. For the ship, we're hoping to demonstrate controlled re-entry, including a flip maneuver and landing burn, and that will be followed by splashdown in the Indian Ocean. That is the same target as we had on Flight 3, so everything should look pretty similar in that regard. And we just heard the call out there that all prop load is closed out, so at this point, there is like 10 million pounds of propellant on board Starship, which is incredible.
This is getting very exciting. We are just about 2 minutes away from T0.
And as Jesse just said, we are under 2 minutes away. So prop load is complete. All the fill drain lines into ship and booster have closed. Right now we're doing the pushback, so clearing out all those ground lines of propellant, and that'll be completed over the next couple of seconds. We're coming up on that T-minus 40 mark. Again, not planning to hold. If we do, or if we get a hold after we pass it, we can snap back to that T-minus 40, and then we can stay there for about 30 minutes or so if any other issues crop up. Once we pass T-minus 40, a lot of things happen, both on the vehicle and the ground. It's running a lot of its own self-checkouts, venting different tanks and pressure lines throughout the vehicle. We essentially built that 40 seconds as that's about how much time it takes for the vehicle to take all of those actions, which is why we hold there. But all of that happens automated. You do a final checkout of the TVC, the thrust vector control, how we're going to steer, and then we see liftoff. So we're under a minute away. "45 seconds and counting."
Good event, game met.
All right, now as we close in, we are past the 40-second mark. So let's listen in. Flight Director Ty Huntington's going to take us through one more time for a Starship liftoff.
T-minus 15. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. We have liftoff.
Vehicle is pitching downrange.
All right, 30 seconds into flight. The rumbles are still building here in the Raptor's nest. We're seeing 32 out of 33 engines lit on the Super Heavy right now. Coming up shortly is going to be max Q, that maximum aerodynamic pressure as we go uphill on the vehicle.
Max Q.
All right, we just passed through max Q, so we're going to continue on up. We still have about a minute and 30 seconds until we get to stage separation. Starship now flying faster than the speed of sound. All right, so you got a couple of views. You got some ground trackers in your top camera there. You're looking down from the top of the booster in the bottom left, and then a camera in the top flap of the ship looking back in the bottom right, so getting a couple of different looks as Starship heads uphill. Once we get the hot staging, a lot of things happen all at once simultaneously. We're going to light the engines on the ship, starting with the RVACs first, and then the 3 center sea level engines before we're separated. All of that exhaust gets plumed out the side of the hot stage, and then the ship will separate itself. All but the 3 center engines on the booster are going to shut down, so the booster never stops its thrust while we go through this hot stage maneuver. After that, the booster is going to do its flip, start heading back, and then the ship will be on its own power on its way to space. So that should be coming up in just about 30 seconds from now. As of right now, still looking in like 32 out of 33 Raptors lit on the booster. And we'll start to see those stagger down. They're going to turn off in banks, so you'll see the lights on the bottom left screen of the engines that are active start to turn off in different groups, and you'll see those 3 center ones lit.
Booster engine cut off. Ship ignition. Stage separation confirmed.
Boost back burn start up.
Acquisition signal. Houston.
Hot stage confirmed. Ship under its own power. Booster boosting back. Looks like all 13 are lit. Kate, we got a booster on the way back to the Gulf and a ship on the way to space.
Acquisition signal. Stennis.
Ship chamber pressures are nominal.
Ship power and telemetry nominal.
All right, the first stage currently performing the boost back burn. This is expected to last a little over 1 minute. This propels the booster back toward the coast, taking it to a landing in the waters of the Gulf of Mexico. As you can see on your screen in the bottom left-hand corner, we were only using the 13 center engines from here on.
Boost back burn shut down.
Heard confirmation there of good boost back burn shutdown.
Stage 2 tank pressures are nominal.
Lots of excitement. So right here, this is our view of the jettisoned hot stage. As we mentioned, this is a temporary fix to help reduce the weight of the booster, the Super Heavy booster. Future iterations will have a lighter weight integrated hot stage structure that won't need to be jettisoned. Now, after we jettison that hot stage, the booster will begin to attempt its water landing in the Gulf. In the meantime, the ship will coast for about 40 minutes or so up to an altitude of 214 kilometers. And after its coast phase, it will attempt a controlled reentry, including a flip maneuver and a landing burn, just before splashing down in the Indian Ocean. But as a reminder, we are not attempting...
Trajectory nominal.
Good news there. Trajectory is looking good for the ship, which is on the right-hand side of your screen. At this point in time, as you can see, we have no engines lit on the booster. It is coasting back toward the Gulf of Mexico for a water landing and ship under power of all 6 Raptor engines. There's 3 sea level and 3 vacuum Raptor engines that are lit, as we can see on your screen.
These views have been looking incredible. Super Heavy has been performing beautifully today. And you can hear the crowd is very excited about it. As a reminder for Booster, the primary goal today is to do a landing burn and a splashdown in the water. And we are just about 30 seconds away from that landing burn expecting to begin. And an incredible view from the forward portion of the booster. This is basically on top of the Super Heavy booster where we have jettisoned that hot stage. So now we can see this incredible view of Earth as it's making its way back down to the Gulf of Mexico. Right now, the booster is using the 4 hypersonic grid fins to guide itself through atmospheric re-entry. And we are expecting that landing burn here. And we will be igniting 13 engines, and this is a great view. On your left-hand side is 3 views from the booster, and your right-hand side a view from the ship. And you can see those grid fins on your left-hand screen rotating and turning to guide the booster, and there's that landing burn. That landing burn just begun, and you can see the water below. And we have splashdown. What an incredible sight! Congratulations to the SpaceX team!
Ship has entered terminal guidance.
That was absolutely incredible. The first successful splashdown of the Super Heavy booster. Loved seeing it just tip over into the water before losing that footage. Now the next milestone is coming up in about under a minute. The ship is going to shut off its Raptor engines,
Ship engine cut off.
which we see right there. As we mentioned before, today's test flight is not an orbital flight, but rather one that demonstrates the Starship's orbital capability. So right now we are under power with just the 3 center Raptor engines. Expecting those, and just there we could see that those have also successfully cut off.
Ship FDS is saved.
What an
Nominal
incredible
orbit insertion.
Oh, there's great news there. The call out we were hoping to hear. Amazing views once again from Starship. We have our second Starship in space. These live views being brought to us by Starlink, which is on board the ship. Dan, what an incredible view we have once again. So exciting. We got another ship in space.
I'm like still jumping up and down. I'm like,
Expected loss signal.
this whole building was going absolutely insane when we saw the booster hit the water. I mean, wow. Congrats to everybody that's just been putting in insane amounts of hours and everything to make this thing a reality. And I feel like every single time we do one of these, we're seeing something wildly new. We got to see the hot stage jettison and the booster in the water. But just to recap real quick over everything that's happened. So we lifted off at 7:50 a.m. only 9 minutes ago. How has it only been 9 minutes? 7:50 a.m. Central at 12:50 UTC. We saw 32 of the 33 Raptor engines on Super Heavy make the ascent. We had successful cutoff, successful hot staging. All 6 engines on the ship powered it all the way into a nominal orbital trajectory. And we've already been getting some live views from the ship on board. After that, the booster was able to do its boost back burn. Oh, this looks like we're actually getting some views from the ground still, potentially from Florida, of the ship as it's up there. That's a view from some of our tracking cameras on the ground in Florida. But the ship, we just heard successful orbital insertion, so it's right where it needs to be and is now going to continue on its way to coast until it comes to reentry. But I mean, the booster, successful boost back burn, jettison the hot stage, and then a landing burn. It looked like we saw 12 of the 13 engines light up, and then that first ever soft splashdown in the water. So a whole lot still to come. Ship now on its way to its primary objective of entry. That's going to be coming up in just under 40 minutes from now. So a lot still to come, but wow, what a 9 minutes to start this mission off. So can't wait to see what entry is going to show us, but that launch was incredible. Back over to you, Jesse and Kate.
Wow. I am still trying to catch my breath here. That was some incredible views that we have never seen before. It has been nonstop since liftoff. And with the booster having completed its job for the day, we're going to take a short break for about the next 28 minutes, and we'll return while we're going to take a break while the ship is continuing to coast before re-entry.
Exactly. As with Flight 3, Starlink may enable us to talk with the ship through re-entry with no communication blackout. We are still testing Starlink during this phase of flight, so of course nothing is certain. However, if we do have views, we will be sure to bring those to you live. Views such as the one, that we had. Well, of course, because I said it, it went away. So we will try to bring those to you live.
Exactly. Views or no views, we'll see you back here at T plus 40 minutes for coverage of Starship's re-entry, flip maneuver, landing burn, and splashdown.
Expected loss signal, Key West. Expected loss signal, Cape Canaveral. Acquisition signal, Puerto Rico.
Our back pre-valves are open.
through the extreme heat of reentry. This is typically a portion of flight where we don't have communications with the spacecraft because it's reentering at or around orbital velocity, which is about 8 kilometers per second or roughly 5 miles per second. At those speeds, the spacecraft moving through the atmosphere results in friction and creates a plasma field around the vehicle. That blanket of plasma distorts, as you can see, that plasma blanket, which you can kind of see here, distorts communication frequencies, so we're left with a brief blackout in communication.
Yeah, that's right, Kate. And Starlink's what's really allowing us to capture as much data as possible, especially through this reentry. Updated animation landing burn. I hope we get to see it for real today. But these live views that we're getting now and we're going to continue to get are through Starlink. That's going to allow us to get as much data as possible, which we've said it before. We're going to say it 9,000 times. The data is the payload on these flights. So as much as we can learn, that's just going to pay dividends on all of our future flights and help us get Starship to an operational phase. Reentry, obviously a really critical phase of the flight, and it's the one that we're now most focused on cracking to get us closer to that full reusability. Starlink is going to be able to send us data back all the way through reentry. We've done some additional testing, and we're expecting to be able to get data from Starlink thanks to its high frequency and kind of the orientation and everything of Starship all the way through reentry. And then got a new view here. We have 2 external views. We had this one on Flight 3. We've got 2 for this one. And we're going to continue adding views as we continue to evolve Starship. Again, this is an experimental vehicle. Believe me, I want as many camera views as you all do. So huge shout out to the AVI and the software teams and everybody that's been working with us. We're getting more cameras on Starship, not just because it looks cool, but this provides an incredible insight into reentry, which is, historically a really tough window to look through.
Approaching entry interface.
The physics of reentry are insanely intense. One of my favorite NASA astronauts, Victor Glover, recently described it as with the forces and the flows and the temperatures, it's like pointing at a raging river in one spot and saying, tell me exactly what's happening right there. And that's what a ship is experiencing as it goes through, as it's moving through the atmosphere at, more than 5 miles a second and heating up to thousands of degrees. So just having visual representation, just being able to see what's happening is incredibly valuable. So these views are going to be through Starlink. We've got this one. This is in one of the forward flaps looking back. So if you see it rotating around, that's because, again, it's embedded in one of those forward flaps. So as we get through and we start to build up density in the atmosphere, this view is going to move around as the flap does. And then the other one we had a little bit earlier is looking at one of the other forward flaps on the other side. Eventually, we're going to keep adding more cameras to Starship, get a couple of different views from the outside of all the different areas, and then also eventually to be able to see payloads once they're deployed. So a lot more exciting stuff coming up in the future. But right now we're getting closer to reentry. Again, we're going to be moving at hypersonic speeds of more than 5 times the speed of sound. We're going to see that plasma start to build. So, Kate, Jesse, excitement coming up.
Yeah, as you can see with that view on your screen, again, high def brought to us by Starlink. We can see the plasma beginning to build as the ship is getting closer to the Earth's atmosphere. Now, let's talk a little bit about how Starship will survive reentry, hopefully, and control itself.
Exactly. We've been talking about this entire flight test. There's 18,000 hexagonal ceramic tiles surrounding the bottom portion or the Earth-facing side of the ship.
Through 100 kilometers altitude, good altitude for entry.
Great call outs there. Now, during atmospheric reentry, the vehicle is going to see temperatures as high as 2,600 degrees Fahrenheit or over 1,400 degrees Celsius. So those tiles are there to help protect the vehicle from this extreme heat.
Yeah, and the flaps will help control it. Now, one noticeable difference I see immediately, those flaps are not moving as much as they were on Flight 3. So that is a great sign, right? We had unplanned loss of roll control on Flight 3, so we added some additional thrusters, and we can see that they're working well, and we have a much more stable view. So those flaps, there's 4 of them, 2 at the top and 2 at the bottom. They're made out of stainless steel, and yeah, they help steer the ship, which, as we can see, the plasma continuing to build. Now, if the ship survives re-entry, it will have to perform a flip maneuver as well as a landing burn. We saw this demonstrated in a couple of high-altitude flight tests back in like 2020, 2021. Similarly,
temperatures increasing on the nose within expected ranges.
Great news there. It sounds like the temperatures that we are getting during this point, which again, we usually don't get during spaceflight because of this plasma. We're getting this live. This is a great news. So similarly to, for example, the serial number 10 test that we saw a couple years ago, we're hoping to duplicate that again today. Hopefully we will see it live. And basically the 3 center engines of the ship will reignite and gimbal or point to help flip the ship until those engines are pointing down so that it can land vertically using Raptor's thrust.
And as you can see, even from the beginning of the program, we've designed Starship to land on Mars where there are no runways or other humans to help out. We also want rapid reusability, so we're doing...
The vehicle is passing through 85 kilometers altitude. The flaps have control of the vehicle.
Great news. Flaps have control of the vehicle. That's exactly what we want to hear for this flight test.
Yeah.
Again, we are going to be doing a propulsive landing instead of a more traditional means like parachutes. And we are expecting re-entry to begin here in just about a minute. Re-entry, an awesome view that we have here.
Starship remains on a good entry trajectory.
This is the same view that we had when we first returned from the coast phase. Again, this is looking at the side of one of the flaps. It's incredible that literally at the bottom of this picture, we're basically looking through plasma, which is just absolutely mind-blowing.
Wild, very wild. Now we are expecting entry to begin here in about 30 seconds or so. Entry to splashdown is expected to last about 6 minutes long. And that flip maneuver should occur around about 10 minutes before splashdown. And such incredible views that we're getting.
Approaching peak heating region.
Great call outs there.
Yeah, these views are absolutely astounding.
Nose temperatures continue to rise within expected region.
And in your bottom right-hand corner, you can also follow along with the altitude of ship as it's returning back to Earth.
So once again, this view is basically looking down into the plasma blanket that is building up around the exterior of Starship. It is traveling, as you can see on your screen. You can look in the bottom right-hand corner and see how fast it's going, how high it is, as well as the general orientation. Again, we're seeing a lot more stability, a lot more control here on this flight, which is great. It shows that the iterations, the learnings...
Starship is now in expected peak heating region.
All right, great news there, telling us that this is basically the hottest point that Starship should get during its re-entry. Now, the heat shield is working with the atmosphere for some free braking, okay? The atmosphere is helping to slow the Starship down.
Yeah, exactly. We're not using any engines or thrust to slow the vehicle down. Exactly what Kate mentioned. We're just using the atmosphere and those heat shield tiles protecting the vehicle as it's coming through that high heat temperature.
Yeah. Now, this is another one of those moments that we have been waiting for. Right now, the ship is currently re-entering the Earth's atmosphere, and by all looks and all call-outs that we're hearing on the net, it is doing pretty well. Now, we do not plan to recover the spacecraft today, but rapid and reliable reusability is the ultimate goal.
And just pausing to just take in this incredible new and different view that we're seeing. We did get a similar view in Flight 3, but again, the vehicle did lose a little bit of its control, attitude control, and this is a very stable view. This is great. This is exactly what we want, and we are hearing that we're getting expected call-outs.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Starship is seeing half a G of acceleration, remains on a good entry trajectory.
You know, it's incredible to look at this photo and wonder, wait, is it real? Is it frozen? You know, we can see so I was just going to say
Nose temperatures have stopped increasing.
Oh, that is great news. The temperature is no longer building. But I was saying, like, we have a little bit of indication there. We can see that streaking that occurs and tells us that this is indeed a true view. So once again, we are looking basically through the plasma that is building up around the exterior of the ship.
And I still cannot get over that we are getting a live view of re-entry right now, live on your screen. Again, we've said this over and over, but all thanks to Starlink. We are able to use Starlink in space, which we're getting this incredible data. And not only just the data from the sensors, but getting live imagery of what is actually happening, which is great, which we've never been able to do live before.
Right. Now, just a quick future outlook here. So in about, let's see, at T plus about 1 hour and 2 minutes, we should hear a call out for entry transonic. That means that the ship is going near the speed of sound. And then about a minute after that, we'll hear another call out saying entry subsonic, meaning that the ship is going below the speed of sound. So these are all continued indications that the atmosphere, right, as the ship comes back down, it is getting through the more dense part of the atmosphere, and that atmosphere is helping to push against the vehicle, and those heat shields are protecting the vehicle during this high heat period.
Yeah, Kate and Jesse, we're starting to see as the atmosphere gets denser, you're starting to see a few more particles make an appearance in the plasma there. You can see you're looking down at the aft end of the ship in the top left, and you're seeing essentially the flame build up as we go through reentry. You've been hearing the call-outs. They're tracking things like temperatures in the nose cone, and those were right where we modeled them to be, which is really cool to see and to see in real time. But we're coming up, we're at about 67 kilometers in altitude. Our last signal with the ship on Flight 3 was at 65, so we should be making it past that point shortly. Obviously, as you guys pointed out, we're in a much better control this time as we re-entered in the right attitude, and our flaps have been steering the way so far. Once we get through transonic, that's when you've got essentially
Raptor landing bird.
Different areas around the vehicle where the air is either moving faster or slower than the speed of sound. We'll eventually get to subsonic, which we have some experience with. We did in our suborbital campaign.
Start of Raptor chill.
And Starship will eventually get down to its terminal velocity as it's floating down to the water. That's just about 200 miles an hour or so. We are hearing that we're starting to chill some of the engines as we are, if we make it all the way down to the water, still going to attempt a landing burn, but still a ways to go. We're at about 64 kilometers in altitude right now. We made it through what's expected to be the peak heating, but now we're going to start encountering increased pressures as the atmosphere gets thicker and thicker. So we're at 63 kilometers, so we've already made it farther than we did on our last flight when that last signal was coming at 65 kilometers. So again, what we're really looking at here is the performance of the heat shield, of the flaps, of the seals in the flaps. There's just a whole bunch of different areas that we're keeping a really close eye on as we re-enter.
Starship remains on a good entry trajectory.
And looking like we're still on a good trajectory. If you're seeing little camera moves, that's the flap moving as it continues to maintain the attitude of the vehicle as it re-enters. And I mean, not just camera views, but we've got sensors inside the ship. We've got those sensors down at the very aft end of the vehicle where we pointed out we had some intentionally missing tiles, where we've got some sensors looking at just how hot it's getting around there. we intentionally put those in essentially the least critical part of the heat shield, where if you had any kind of a breach, it wouldn't be great for reusability, but wouldn't be critical for actual making it through the reentry into the landing. "58 kilometers, we're continuing to descend. Again, right now we are over the Indian Ocean. We're actually getting closer and closer to that expected splashdown point, which is just to the off the northwest corner of Australia. And if you keep an eye on our speed, the speed is dropping. We're hitting the thicker part of the atmosphere now. The speed's going to start dropping precipitously. We're going to start getting to transonic pretty soon, and then after that we'll get into subsonic, where we're moving less than the speed of sound. But wow, what a light show so far.
External temperatures are starting to come down.
Again, this camera view is looking right at one of the forward flaps. And we're strategically putting some cameras around the vehicle to just look at the different areas that, looks like we got the flap starting to come apart a little.
Yeah, it does appear that we have a little bit of burn through there. We can see pieces of the vehicle flying off. What a show it has been. It's been like watching Interstellar or something.
This is wild to see this, but the ship is still coming down, which is incredible to see.
How far can it go? That is the question.
Keep your eye on the altitude in the bottom right-hand corner. We're at 54 kilometers right now.
Now, ultimately, the data is the payload today. We've been saying it multiple times. Our teams are sitting, reviewing this data live, learning where the hot spots are. As you can see, there's an obvious hot spot there with the flap, and learning how we can improve this design. The goal was to get as far through this high heat re-entry as possible. Ideally, we'd love to make it all the way down and perform that landing burn and flip maneuver, but we may not get that far today. We will see.
Again, this is a test, and we are gathering as much data as possible, visual data as well, which we can see here. We are getting a lot of debris covering the camera on your screen, but we can still see some of those sparks and flames from that high heat as ship is making its way back down to Earth.
Ship now at 50 kilometers and closing. The good news is we still got, looks like that camera lens just cracked. It's safe to say ship's getting a little beat up, but that's to be expected on a test flight. We are still learning how to improve the ship for total survival and recovery of the high heat reentry.
I'm honestly impressed that we're still getting this live view despite how much debris is coming off of this flap right now.
The fact that we've got it is good news. And I may have jinxed it. I apologize. Look at that, it's back.
We are still going.
And the teams here at SpaceX are excited, as you can tell by the cheering behind us. There's still a sizable crowd here at Mission Control Center Hawthorne.
A splashdown is expected in just about 4 minutes from now. And we're still moving. We still have live views. Starlink is doing an incredible job.
Maximum entry dynamic pressure. External temperatures are dropping.
Okay, good news. Those external pressures are dropping. The question is, how much of the ship is left? We can't really tell. We can still see some of that particulate coming off. And unfortunately, we do have a cracked camera lens. But for any photographers out there and videographers, we know that's part of the gig sometimes.
Yeah, and you can see that the speed is rapidly slowing down. That's actually really great news for us. We want the vehicle to be slowing down before it splashes down into the ocean. That'll help set us up for that flip maneuver, engines first down into the water.
Exactly. So we have seen this flip maneuver demonstrated on previous high altitude flight tests like serial number 8. Oh, more views, or excuse, I should say more light coming through the view that we have through that cracked and dirtied lens there. But yeah, so we're hoping that this flip maneuver, that we can pull it off as soon as we get those views back. If we can get them, if the ship is still around, we will bring it back to you.
Vehicle has passed maximum dynamic pressure.
That is great news. Maximum dynamic pressure being the moment in which the vehicle experiences the greatest amount of aerodynamic pressure. Speed still dropping. We're now at 37 kilometers above the ocean. Just like Flight 3, we are targeting a splashdown in the water in the Indian Ocean.
And we don't have a live view right now, but because we're still getting data and telemetry, that does tell us that ship is still doing okay, at least. And there we got that live view back. The crowd very excited to see that view, despite not being able to see very much.
The fact that it's there tells us the ship is still alive.
Yes, and collecting data, continuing to collect data as we get closer and closer to Earth.
Yes, now 30 kilometers, now 29 above the Indian
Starship is
Ocean.
at 30 kilometers altitude, Mach 2.
Sounds like the vehicle's traveling, as we just heard, Mach 2, which is, looks like we might, I thought maybe it might clear up. It is a little bit, now at T+1 hour, 3 minutes and 13 seconds into Starship Flight 4, hoping that the ship can hang on. It's probably potentially hanging on by a couple of bolts and threads, but it's still going, and that is excellent news.
That deceleration is looking incredible. We're about to go under 1,000 kilometers per hour.
Yeah.
Starship is at 20 kilometers altitude.
Now, keep in mind that even though we can't see anything, the data itself is what we really are.
Starship is subsonic.
Subsonic, they're telling us it's traveling below the speed of sound. That movement means the flaps are actuating. I think we can see something. This is a nail biter. But we are, unfortunately, we can't see through the lens, but we're still getting the feed. Starship is now 11 kilometers over the ocean. All this data is incredibly important, even if, you know, it breaks up right now. Okay, we can see that flap actuating through the glass.
Starship is passing through 10 kilometers altitude.
Okay, the next milestone will be initiation of the flip maneuver and landing burn. Keep an eye on the bottom right corner of your screen for those 3 center engines to relight. They will gimbal or angle so that the ship flips itself back up vertical and hopefully lands in a vertical position.
And the crowd is very excited to get this view of that flap still maneuvering.
Starship is passing through 5 kilometers altitude.
This is incredible. We're getting very close to splashdown.
These fireflies are such a good sign of life right now. We wish we could see more, but we'll take it.
Starship is at 2 kilometers altitude, terminal velocity.
Landing burn startup for Starship.
All right, good news there.
Nominal chamber pressure.
Landing burn startup.
Starship is in landing burn.
Landing burn shutdown.
The landing burn shutdown was commanded. Wow. I mean, it was a little bit of use your imagination as you were going down with what we could actually see, but we were able to hear the ship did its landing burn. It sounded
Starship
like we might have got
shutdown.
2 engines. And there's the final call for landing burn shutdown, but we'll go back through all the data, but we did get confirmation that a landing burn took place. Starship made it through re-entry and did its first ever landing burn. From South Texas to the other side of the earth, Starship is in the water. What a day. What a day, guys. Yeah, that was absolutely incredible. We got views pretty much the whole way down. Analysis said it could do it. We weren't sure if it was going to be able to happen, but Starlink powered through, and we were able to get signal. We started to get some debris on the cameras and everything, but we were able to see it. So, I mean, what a day. Just recapping, everything started off today. We lifted off from here in Starbase just about an hour ago. It feels like a lifetime. Successful super heavy ascent, boost back, and its own splashdown in the Gulf. Ship made it to space, kept its attitude. Successful re-entry through peak heating. We got to see it under flap control through the atmosphere, and we got call out of our first ever ship landing burn after a launch into space. So just really incredible. So I'm going to take some time to collect myself, but wow, that was incredible. I can't wait for the next one. Over to you guys.
It was so loud here. I haven't heard the crowd get that loud probably since liftoff of Flight 1, honestly.
That was incredible. Congratulations to our teammates, to everyone who supported the Starship program. Thanks to all of our future customers for your support. And we'd also like to thank the people of Cameron County, Texas, as well as the Coast Guard, the Federal Aviation Administration, and the government of Mexico. And since Starship got a little bit toasty from that extreme heat of reentry, and we've got our very own Starship right here, let's have a toast of our own.
I've been waiting all morning for this.
Okay, may I?
Light me up. Yeah. Just like Starship, I like this toasty.
I'm keeping this.
Now, we've got more Starship test flights coming to you soon. Be sure to follow the SpaceX account on X for more updates from today's test flight and future Starship tests. Thanks for watching, and we will see you next time.